In the game Mass Effect, you are presented with a choice to kill one of your longtime companions. You can also punch a reporter in the face, which is funny.
I've had enough of your snide insinuations.
In the game Bioshock, you have the option to save the little girls you come across or siphon them for their resources. In the game Spec Ops: The Line, you are presented with multiple no-win scenarios throughout your journey. Every choice you make has a great cost. In the game Baldur's Gate 3, you have many choices, some of which have shockingly hilarious outcomes. And in the game The Stanley Parable, the game asks you to do just one thing.
When Stanley came to a set of 2 open doors, he entered the door on his left.
All of these games and many more like them understood a very important principle unique to video games. You see, video games are not like other forms of media, yet in recent years they are often treated like movies with extra steps. This is partly because the increase in graphical fidelity has tricked us into feeling like they are playable movies. Developers certainly have a habit of acting like graphics and how the game looks are the most important part of selling it to gamers. But this ignores one vital and inescapable truth about the way video games operate. In order to understand this truth, we have to turn to our old friend, the novel. But Star, I hear you whine, I don't read books. I don't like books. Books are boring. Well, too bad, because today I'm here to argue that video games have more in common with books than they do with movies, and should be treated accordingly. And I'm not just talking about visual novels or text-heavy RPGs, I'm talking all games. Even this one. And this one. And this one too. But how? Well, you have to think about what happens when you sit down to read a book versus when you sit down to watch a movie. When you open a book to read it, you are basically making an agreement with the author. They agree to give you all of the tools you need to immerse yourself in the world they provide. If you find out that you don't like the world or the people in it, you can leave at any time. But you also need to give something in this agreement. You will need to give the story your full attention and activate your imagination to immerse yourself. You have to be willing to keep track of names of people and places and remember what they look like from description alone. If there's a magic system or a hyper-futuristic machine, you'll need to come up with what it might look like on your own, and so on and so on. The limitations of words on paper serve to a novel's advantage, because now the reader must take an active part in bringing the imagined world to life in order for them to enjoy it. Contrast that with what happens when you sit down to watch a movie. You turn it on, and it's on. You can give it all or only a portion of your attention. You will get out of it as much as you put in, but it doesn't require that you make any effort for the scenes to play out. The movie will run on its own as long as you let it. The world you encounter is presented to you as an experience. You are an observer here to watch events play out. This is the difference between a passive and an interactive medium. So what happens when you combine the two? You get video games. A game requires that you take part in the world within it, either by controlling a character or overcoming gameplay obstacles, but many games are also presented to you as an experience that you are meant to observe. And this is where we come to the crux of the issue. This is the main reason behind why players skip stories. It's a matter of control. When you are asked to interact with a world, you are the one in control. You are the one who decides which characters you want to talk to, how you want to explore, which items you want to use, what techniques and skills you prefer. But when you are asked to observe the world passively, like through a cutscene, you must give up your control and allow the one presenting, in this case the developers, to take the reins. I think people severely underestimate how much of a video game is a negotiation between the player and the developer. All media is a negotiation to an extent. You, the audience, agree to sit down with that book and accept the narrative that is being shared with you. You agree to turn on the TV and press play. You agree to sit in the theater and give the actors on stage your attention. and the one presenting the media to you agrees to provide you with entertainment, education, or even just a distraction from boredom. But that agreement can be easily broken. You can turn off the TV, walk out of the theater, or close the book at any time you feel that you are not getting what you want out of it. In video games, however, that agreement happens at a far greater frequency with far more points of friction than any other medium. Because you are in control throughout, every single time the game wants to take that control away from you, you have to make that negotiation again and accept that loss of control. Depending on how it is done and how often, this can become more and more grating over time, or, if done well, can add to the overall experience. Let's look at some concrete examples. When it released in the summer of 2023, Final Fantasy XVI was initially praised for its story, especially the gritty and shocking introduction. But as people began playing through the entirety of the narrative, that sentiment shifted, with many bemoaning how long the cutscenes were and how often they appeared. People said it felt like they were watching a movie. They said they sometimes forgot they were even holding a controller. While I have no doubt that they intended to provide a satisfying experience for their players, the developers behind 16 seem to have forgotten, or even ignored, their end of the deal with the player. And this is kind of the core issue with video games as a medium. When the devs have a strong vision for the story they want to tell, the player can seem like an obstacle in the way to telling their story. Because the moment the player is involved, you have to think about their agency, and that the choices some people want to make will directly oppose the dev's vision. This is how you end up with long cutscenes and meaningless dialogue options. It's to cut out the player involvement and maintain the purity of the story. The player can have their fun in the gameplay, and they are expected to sit quietly during the story as their payment. I think for a certain subset of people, there's a subconscious knee-jerk reaction to that. Like, if you're not going to let me be a part of the story in this interactive medium, then I'll just skip it and focus on the parts that I can interact with. While many of those people would say, if I wanted to sit through a story, I'd watch a movie, you'll find that they do have favorite video game stories. The pattern is that the story is almost fully integrated into the gameplay itself, and creates minimal friction by taking control away from the player as little as possible. Much like the examples at the beginning, those games recognize the player's agency as a vital component to telling their story. This should be the gold standard. Games should be excited to include the player in their story because that is the one unique benefit of video games over other modes of storytelling. You cannot have a game like Bioshock or Disco Elysium or the Stanley Parable in any other medium because the choices the player makes are part of the story itself. For most developers, however, making that compromise and involving the player is seen as overly complicated, cumbersome, and a drain on manpower and resources that could be used elsewhere. I think the most memorable games are ones that respect the unique relationship between creator and receiver in games. Ones that make use of the benefits of interactivity to tell stories that can't be told any other way. The Stanley Parable is a meta-commentary on this unique relationship. In it, you play Stanley, an office worker who finds himself in an empty office and must unravel the mystery of why. All you have is the narrator, who will commentate on your actions and tell you where you should go and what you should do in order to properly experience the story. The narrator often gets upset and frustrated at Stanley when you make choices that contradict his instructions. And to be sure, the experience of getting a player to do what you want as a developer is like herding angry and entitled cats. Stanley, for his part, is completely silent and can say nothing back to the narrator to explain his thoughts and reasoning. He can only act through his choices to follow or deny the narrator. The game has multiple endings based on your choices, but the one that fascinated me most was the one where Stanley makes no choice at all. If you get the not Stanley ending, you are presented with a rare bird's eye view of Stanley from above as the narrator desperately tries to get Stanley, who is no longer being controlled by the player and is therefore an empty husk, to make any choice at all.
Is everything okay? Stanley, please. I need you to make a choice. I need you to walk through the door. Are you listening to me? Can you hear me? Is everything all right? Stanley, this is important. The story needs you. It needs you to make a decision. It cannot exist without you. Do you understand me? Whatever choice you make is just fine. They're both correct. You cannot be wrong here. We can work together. I'll accept whatever you do. I simply need you to take that step forward, please. Choose. Do something. Anything. This is more important than you can ever know. I need this. The story needs it. So, you hear me? Are you there? Are you listening to this? Stanley, are you there? Okay. It's okay, I can wait. You need time to decide. Time to make sure your choice is correct. That is the best choice. That's all right. I'll wait for you to decide what's the right thing to do. Take as much time as you need.
There's one other reason why people skip stories that has nothing to do with whether developers respect their agency or not. This is me. This is me completing the Epic of Alexander, or T, a 20-minute boss gauntlet and the hardest content in the MMO Final Fantasy XIV. The year is 2021. It's the height of Shadowbringers, arguably the most popular expansion the game has ever released. I've spent the last year playing through the absolute avalanche of content in the game, burning through several hundred hours of cutscenes and story content to reach the endgame. After trying out Savage Raiding thanks to the recommendation of a friend, I start to dip my toes into Ultimates, of which there are 3. I clear the first 2, taking 1 month and 1.5 months to beat the fights respectively. Talk of the new expansion is ramping up. People are excited for Endwalker and speculating on the new story. Many are racing to finish content before the new expansion drops, since people will be too busy with all the new content to bother with continuing the old stuff for a while. In mid-September, only 2 months before Endwalker's launch, I make the decision to take on T, the last ultimate I haven't cleared yet. It's ambitious. Clearing an ultimate raid can take anywhere from 1 to 6 months depending on your team. My previous clears were filled with people who had already done the fights, which significantly sped up our practice time. Now I'll be recruiting on my own. And since T was the newest ultimate, less people had cleared it, meaning my team would likely not have anyone who had already cleared before. I gather 2 of my friends and 5 other players who answer my recruitment post. All I can do is pray there will be no drama and no dropouts. We won't have time for either. The race against time was on. We started off strong, but inevitably stalled out a few times on hard mechanics. We increased the amount of days we raided, sometimes going 5 days a week. Some days, we made no progress at all. By mid-October, we were getting worried. By the start of November, it seemed hopeless. We'd just hit the hardest mechanic wall in the fight. The new expansion was set to release on November 23rd. We weren't gonna make it. We started to discuss our options. Maybe we could move up to 6 days a week. Could we all find time to add more sessions to our schedule? Would it make a difference? Then the announcement came in.
理由はちょっと後ほど説明させていただきますが、11月23日発売予定の今日月のフィナーレですが、申し訳ございません。間に合いませんでした。すいません。
So we will explain the reasonings later, but this is to sincerely apologize that the Endwalker expansion that was planned for November 23rd, I'm afraid will not make it in time for that release timing, so we sincerely apologize.
What was a disappointment for many was an unexpected boon for our group. A 2-week delay meant we could definitely do it. We could clear this fight. With renewed hope, we continued on until, on November 19th, just 4 days before the original release was scheduled, it happened.
This looks good. Oh yes, I land both.
Come on,
Alright,
come on.
alright.
Nice.
Come on.
Kill it, guys, come
Kill
on!
it. Stop.
Oh my
Stop.
god, oh
Stop.
my
Kill it.
We saved
We
it.
got it. We got it. We got it.
Oh my
Oh
god!
my fucking god.
Oh, I have to die. I have to die so we can kill it. Yeah.
Oh my fucking god.
Oh, so it's so close, man. I literally LB and then I land my Subame on the very
Oh my
last
god.
second.
Oh my god. It's finally. We're finally here, guys. We finally get to get a screenshot.
Alright guys, we're just spending.
Oh my god.
Fucking
you,
hard, right?
everyone.
Holy.
That moment, those 2 months of banging our heads against a brick wall, the anxiety and the relief are some of the best memories I have of any video game I've ever played. There was no real story behind the fight itself. It's just a boss battle with some cool music and hard mechanics. The story is one I made myself. It's one I can tell to anyone who will listen without missing a beat. I think there are people who just prefer that. Rather than consuming a pre-made story, they want to make their own. What they want out of a video game is not an experience like they'd get with a movie, but a set of tools and a playground to use them in. They want a place to make their own stories. So for someone like that, a set narrative will feel like an intrusion on their own story. I think there are already a lot of games that cater to people like this. Games that are light on story and heavy on gameplay. Elden Ring and Skyrim stand out in my mind as obvious examples. While the issue of interactive storytelling is one that devs should absolutely address, I think in the case of players who prefer to tell their own stories, all devs need to do is provide the tools and get out of the way to let people have their own fun. There is no set way to make a game narrative. It's a wide spectrum, from visual novels to Metroidvania side-scrollers and everything in between. I think it's healthy for video games to make use of different levels of interactivity. It's not and shouldn't be one size fits all. But devs need to be aware of what kind of audience they will attract with their game. To go back to the example of Final Fantasy XVI, I think one of their main issues was the disconnect between their battle system and narrative length. 16 utilizes a hack-and-slash action system in the vein of something like Devil May Cry, with the main selling point being freedom in how you choose to utilize skills and execute combos. The issue is that if you're going to entice people with freedom and control, you can't continually rip that freedom and control away from them and expect it to go over well. The kind of player that is interested in exploring the depths of a rich combat system is often not the same kind of player that is looking for a game with 30-minute cutscenes. Or at least, they would rather not have it in the same game. If you look at Devil May Cry 5 story cutscenes, they're far shorter and less involved than 16's. DMC understood what kind of player they were marketing towards and adjusted their story accordingly. For 16, it felt like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too by appealing to 2 very different kinds of gamers, gameplay-focused and story-focused, and ended up pleasing no one. It seems that many large game companies no longer know how to appeal to their audience because they don't know who their audience is. They want to think their audience is gamers and try to bring in everyone with a little bit of everything, when what one type of gamer likes is sometimes directly opposed to what another type of gamer wants. At the end of the day, there is a subset of people who have no patience for stories in games no matter what you do. There are people who just don't like to read, people who really love to grind, people who just want to play with their friends. I know one guy who refuses to continue the story in Final Fantasy XIV until the streamer Asmongold plays it on his stream. There are a ton of other streamers who have played through the whole story and provided voice to the text-only sections, but for him, it just has to be Asmongold. On the other hand, I have a friend who just doesn't like movies. She has a hard time sitting down to watch one, but she will absolutely dump 100 or 200 hours into a story-heavy RPG with hours and hours of cutscenes. You cannot force people to participate, in video games or in any entertainment. People will just skip the things that they don't want to take part in, and they don't owe an explanation for it. The only thing game developers can do is make the experience the best it can be to entice more people to participate. This requires awareness of the nature of the medium and making use of the particular advantages it has over other mediums to tell stories. Otherwise, you're just wasting a great opportunity to make something truly special.